Fantastic, folks. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our workshop today. If you give us just another minute, we're going to let folks take the time they need to click into the link. While we wait, please feel free to drop where you're calling in from into the chat and what you're hoping to learn today.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Danny, for the warm up and the introduction. I think we'll get going here. We've got a nice group joining us. So hello, everyone, and welcome to Igniting 2SLGBTQ Entrepreneurship, StartOut Canada's first official virtual launch event. My name is Sam Numson. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a programming board member with StartOut Canada. I'm really pleased, really honored to be guiding you through our very jam-packed and star-studded, if I do say so myself, event tonight. I'd first like to start by recognizing that we are all gathering on the traditional and unceded territories of Indigenous peoples across this nation or wherever you are. I'm joining you from Toronto virtually, situated on Treaty 13 of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. June, of course, is Pride Month, but it is also Indigenous History Month here in Canada. And we are just around the corner from summer solstice, National Indigenous Peoples Day. We acknowledge that the history of Canada is built by the dispossession of Indigenous communities from their ancestral lands and policies and practices that caused and continue to cause harm. I encourage you to join me and the others on this call in doing everything we can, committing to educating ourselves and taking actions toward building a future that centers, justice and respect instead of perpetuating harm. With that, we will get to a little bit of an agenda check. First off, I'd like to welcome everyone joining us from across the country. Maybe even some folks from international destinations are joining us. We're so glad to have you all here. Before we get to our fireside chat with StartOut's CEO, Brian Richardson, we'll hear from our StartOut Canada Programming Board co-chairs, Dallas Barnes and Nancy Shadlock, who will provide an introduction to StartOut. For those who don't know, what is StartOut? And in particular, what is StartOut Canada? Following our fireside chat with Brian, my fellow programming board member, Kelvin Kung, will lead a really special panel for you all to enjoy. We have Matthew McLaughlin from the Bow platform, Vanessa Intinu of CGLCC, Canada's 2SLGBTQI Chamber of Commerce, and Mandy Potter of Misfit Ventures. And after that, I'll be back to wrap things up. So to kick things off, it is certainly my pleasure to introduce Dallas Barnes and Nancy Shadlock, co-chairs of the StartOut Canada Programming Board.
Hi, everyone. Sam. Yeah, thanks, Sam. Hey, Nancy. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Dallas, and my pronouns are she and her. I am joined with Nancy, a fellow co-chair. We're so excited to be able to introduce StartOut Canada in an official capacity. I wanted to invite if Danny wants to come on and talk a little bit about StartOut overall, and then we can share more about our mission and our vision for StartOut Canada and a little bit of a backstory too.
Fantastic, Dallas. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for joining us for this launch of StartOut Canada. As many of you know, StartOut is a US-based organization. We're excited to have our first international branch. A lot of the work that we do is with entrepreneurs at different points in their career and their business journey, offering, as you can see there, through some of our mission work. Really, it's to increase opportunity and success for LGBTQ entrepreneurs in whichever way that means, whether that is through community events and programming like this, work that we do with our mentorship and expert office hours, through our Growth Lab and Spark Lab, accelerator and incubators, respectively, or through access to capital. We want to be there to support the work that you all are doing. And we're excited to learn more about the Canadian community and how we can be resources for you all and want to make sure that we support the work that you're doing. But excited to have you all here, grateful for that work. And back to you, Dallas.
Awesome. Thank you.
I could go ahead and do some of this backstory, and then Dallas can give the specific story. StartOut itself was founded in 2009, and it's, yeah, like you said, there's been such a huge impact across the US in supporting LGBT entrepreneurs. And now we're excited to be here in this time where we're doing it in Canada. So Dallas, tell us, how did this come to be?
Yeah, absolutely. I am proud StartOut Canada will be the first, is the first international chapter of StartOut. And I'm excited to see many more other international chapters. I first started my company, a little bit of backstory. I'm the founder and CEO of a women's health tech company called Rhea Health. And when I first launched the company a few years ago now, I definitely, like many other entrepreneurs, was not out in the tech space, let alone the business space and in the business world. And the more I started down my entrepreneurial journey, I'm sure many of you on this call can relate. It's stressful. It's hard. You really need community and people around you. And I'm so grateful that I do have a really great personal community. And as a queer woman, I was starting to really crave that in my day-to-day and crave that sense of community and a place of really feeling, not alone and like I belonged in the tech space. And so I was introduced to StartOut for resources and for that sense of community. And I went through their Growth Lab program. This was maybe a couple of years ago, and I fell in love. I fell in love with the people, with the team, with their perspective on business, their perspective on how to launch a company and take it to the next stage. And I was really inspired and continued to access resources through the StartOut portal and community. And when the opportunity came, they were doing some recruitment for co-chairs and programming board. I had a crazy idea to extend internationally into Canada, and Danny and the StartOut team jumped on it. And the other folks that we have along today, Nancy jumped on the opportunity to join in this crazy adventure. And we have since formed an incredible programming board. We have Christopher Longton, Connor Lynn. I'll do shout outs here. A couple of folks you've already met, Sam. Kelvin will be leading our panel later on, Luis and Tyler, of course. And special thanks to all of you. I'm super excited. And Nancy, if you want to share a little bit about our vision and what we're excited to have at StartOut Canada.
Yeah, it's astounding that only 0.5% of funding goes to LGBT folks, and that, we're a creative bunch. There's tons of patents that are being created. I just came home from Toronto, where I was at the CGLCC conference, where LGBT companies were gathering, and it's such a neat community. And so often when I'm talking about StartOut, people are like, well, why another organization? There's already, Queer Tech and CGLCC and Out on Bay, or Start Proud, I guess it is now. And so we're really trying to get clear on what it is that would make this unique and what spaces there are that need to be filled. And so one of the big ones that we've come to realize in our focus groups is that even within the LGBTQ2A+ community, there's still people who are marginalized within that. And so we really want to be available for people who live in rural locations, who aren't just in the big cities, people who have recently come to Canada, people in the trans, non-binary community, and others who don't have the same representation, and really be accessible for them. And so we would love it if you would connect us with people in that realm and share about StartOut. There's all these amazing supports that we have access to from the US. community. And so there's mentorship and online portals, office hours, growth lab, like Dallas mentioned, and access to funders. In October, they're going to have the StartOut Awards in New York. And so that would be really fun to be able to attend. They just had the StartOut Con in June here in San Francisco. And they also have StartOut Demo Day. And so if you have a product that you want to bring, that would be amazing to have you as part of it. And we have webinars coming up, panels. There's an amazing YouTube library of all the different workshops that have come in the past. And so this would be a really great resource to look at if you're trying to start out a business. There's also some in-person networking and social events. We had one at Barry's gym in Vancouver a couple months ago. It was amazing. Tyler, our board member, led us in a sweaty workout, and we had a lot of fun afterwards. I added some of my mental fitness training to it, and it was a really neat time for LGBT and allies to come together and be in person. One of the other things that we're really looking forward to is collaborating with places like McMaster, where they have incubators for founders. And so we'll partner with them and do some other really neat things. And so we're open to any other ideas that you have for us for how to grow this community, any other underserved populations that we should be keeping an eye out for. And we would love for you to get on our mailing list and stay connected with us and give us any feedback that you have. So thank you for being here today. And we can't wait to get to know you and hear your story and what drew you to this. And then also, how can we support you?
Amazing. Dallas, do you have any final words before we sign off from both of you?
Yeah, I think the overall call to action is let us know feedback. This is our first launch event, first virtual event. Would love to keep the lines of communication open with all of you. Right now, we are really focused on building that community and learning from the existing supports and things and where we can really meaningfully add value. So let us know, give us some feedback, connect. And yeah, thank you all so much. Please engage in the chat.
Yeah, I love that you folks are speaking things in the chat. And so share some more with us. What specifics what's coming to mind in terms of collaborations or other ways that we could be involved in supporting you all?
Great. Thank you both. On that point, Dallas, about feedback, at the end of the webinar tonight, there's an opportunity as well to fill out a survey where we seek some information both about your experience with this event and also what might make it even better in the future. And there's an opportunity to provide your contact information if you want to stay connected. With that, I'm super honored and very excited to introduce Brian. Brian is the Chief Executive Officer of StartOut, the leading nonprofit organization supporting LGBTQ+ entrepreneurs in the US, as we've heard. With a career spanning the nonprofit, tech, and public sectors, Brian brings a really deep commitment to economic justice and inclusive innovation. Prior to his time at StartOut, he served as director of Lambda Legal's Midwest region, where he led national strategic planning and expanded programming across 10 states. Brian has also held leadership roles at the Chicago Department of Public Health, Google, and the Democratic National Committee. He's a graduate of University of Chicago with an MBA from UC Berkeley. He is a passionate person, super into creating equitable access to opportunity for all LGBTQ founders, and we're super grateful to have him here today. So Brian, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. So what I want to start with is understanding a little bit about what brought you to the work of StartOut and advancing 2SLGBTQ equity for entrepreneurs and founders.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question. Working for my own community, the LGBTQ+ community, is something that has always been a passion of mine. My goal in life is just to help make sure the world is a little bit better than I found it, which can be a challenge, as we all know, but in particular working in the queer community. And so, as you mentioned, I worked at Lambda Legal. I've worked and consulted with other LGBTQ plus organizations over the time throughout my career. And even when I was working in non-LGBTQ places, I was typically working within the queer sector in those spots. However, the opportunity for StartOut presented itself about 2 years ago. They were looking for a new CEO, and I heard about it and started thinking like, oh, maybe this is the right spot for me. But at first I didn't think so because I thought, you know what? I'm squarely into queer justice. I want to move forward on that and social progress. This is more economic opportunity. But then I went home after reading through the job description and thinking about it, and I was reminded of my middle school teacher. I grew up in Alabama, in Birmingham, Alabama. And if you know American civil rights history, that was a hotbed of civil rights protests and activity. And my middle school teacher, Mrs. Thomas, was this fabulous Black woman who, when she was in school, participated in walkouts and protesting the segregated schools that she went to as a Black woman. And the police attacked. They turned fire hoses on her and her classmates and 6 police dogs on them. Yet she persisted, as did her classmates. And the opportunity to learn civil rights history from her was really paradigm shifting for me, and realized that, you know what, there's more work for us to do. But one day in class, she asked us a question. Why was it always the preachers who led the civil rights movement in small towns across the US? And in the smaller town, it was always the Black preacher. No one else was really leading the movement. And we answered because they're good communicators, or connected to the community, or they're morally righteous. And she said, no, that's not why. The real reason why is that in these small towns, they are typically the only person whose paycheck is written by Black folks. And when I remembered that lesson that she taught us, I started realizing if we're going to talk about queer justice, we have to talk about economic opportunity, because there is no opportunity to fight for social progress. There is no opportunity to live your authentic lives free from prejudice and fear without first, in our societies and our countries, winning and achieving economic independence and financial security. The preachers had done that. And so with the help of the community. And so they were able to help lead the community forward on social progress. It's the same within the queer movement and any social justice movement. How do we ensure that economic opportunity? And so for me, this, to bring it circle around to the question you asked, that is why StartOut is so important to me. Because at StartOut, we are creating opportunities for queer people to create their own opportunity and to chart their own economic path. Earlier, Dallas and Nancy were talking about the challenges facing and the extreme disparity still facing queer folks across North America and frankly across the world. How do we put that together? And so that's why I work at StartOut. Sorry, that was sir.
No, and we're done. No, I'm kidding. You talked a little bit about growing up in the South, and obviously there are some notions that people have about being queer or doing work that's queer in spaces like the South. But I think these days, protections for LGBTQ2S plus people seem perpetually at risk, perpetually on the cusp of being overturned, taken away, regardless of how hard they were fought for and earned. How do you navigate that sort of precarious situation where you're doing work, you're trying to empower LGBTQ2S plus folks to create their own economic success and futures, while at the very same time their fundamental rights are kind of being used in public and private spaces to be played with politically?
It's the hardest part of our job, but it's something that every queer person has had to face our entire life. And we know that we must continue to fight. And today is a great example on this side of the country, or a horrible example, I should say, on this side of the border, because the US Supreme Court just struck down, or rather upheld, a discriminatory law taking away youth rights to healthcare and also their parents' rights to provide gender affirming healthcare to trans kids, and put it instead in the hands of legislators. That is deeply problematic. I would rather make decisions about my son's health together with him and with his doctor, not by my state legislators. But I keep the faith and realize that queer people have been here before. Tomorrow, also here in the US, we celebrate Juneteenth, which, in case you don't know, was the day 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was passed, that the word that slavery had been ended finally reached the last enslaved Black persons in Galveston, Texas. And oftentimes it's called America's Second Independence Day, because it was finally the day that slavery ended in our country. But that idea of a Second Independence Day reminds me that the path toward liberty and opportunity and justice is not linear, that it requires lots of back and forth and challenges. But this is something that marginalized folks, that Black folks in the Civil Rights Movement, the First Nations folks, that queer people know quite well, because it's what we fight for every single day. And so it's tough, but I couldn't imagine doing anything else, because I know that if we continue to work together, we will continue to move forward.
I want to switch gears just a little bit and move into sort of the entrepreneurial space, or the economic kind of the business landscape. You have a pretty diverse background working in, public health, technology, the legal and political sectors. Are there some spaces, whether from your personal experience or observations, where you feel like doing your work as a queer person is maybe easier or harder? Or is it just hard? Is it just easy?
Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting question. I mean, in many ways, I've built a career and chosen opportunities in spaces where it's known that I'm queer and I don't have to come out. Because when I go and say, "Oh, I work at StartOut," what's StartOut? "Oh, we're an organization that supports queer entrepreneurs," then people assume that I'm queer, and so it makes it easier to not constantly have to come out. And I kind of put the rainbow flag on my resume everywhere I can. Um, and I feel like that's been a huge benefit for me, and probably part of the reason why I go into the industries I go into, or go into the jobs that I go into. Um, but we know from all the conversations we've had with the founders that we serve and the data that we've compiled, that there are still so many LGBTQ plus entrepreneurs who don't feel comfortable coming out. They're not out to their investors. They're not out to their co-founders even. They're not out to their employees. And we also know that when you are not out and bringing your full self to your job, you're not doing as good of a job as you could be. And on top of that, your mental health suffers. And so if we want to unleash the true economic power of our countries and our world, we've got to create a space where everyone feels comfortable being their full self and coming out from the get-go. And one of the most powerful parts about StartOut is when that founder comes out, is that they are able to create a better, more inclusive, affirming workplace for their teams and their companies as they start to grow, and really create a better path for everyone.
I have some experience in the nonprofit advocacy space, and one thing I remember thinking constantly was, it feels like the work of equity-seeking people falls on the backs of equity-seeking people often, and certainly not a blanket statement. We had lots of support in some of the initiatives we undertook, but often, the true advocacy comes from those who are on the receiving end of the injustice. So, as we, are wrapping up Pride Month and kicking off Pride Month in other areas of the world, a time where LGBTQ2S plus people are spotlighted, maybe not so much this year, as you've hinted at. How can our allies, how can people who maybe are fervent supporters but not part of the 2S LGBTQ plus community, investors, accelerators, corporate partners, customers, clients, how can allies better support 2S LGBTQ founders, entrepreneurs?
Yeah, first and foremost is to step up and speak out, and not just when it's politically advantageous or commercially advantageous. I think we've seen a lot of companies take a step back recently. And so we've realized who our allies maybe are versus those who are doing that performative bit. But I think specific to our sector, on the investor side especially, it is still so hard for queer entrepreneurs who are looking for venture funding to get a foot in the door. And a lot of it is because it is frankly good old boy networks, or you have to know someone or gone to the same school with that person, or hung out with that person. And so some of the simple tools we ask investors and VC firms to consider making is to provide an opportunity for people to submit cold pitch decks to you. People who may not have the opportunity or the connections to be able to send something that will actually be reviewed. It's a small step, but we know that in some cases that may make the difference and get that door open a little bit, not just for queer folks, but for women, for BIPOC folks, who often are left out, and the data show do not get that same opportunity. But regardless, even just putting that rainbow sticker on your cubicle at your desk or on your LinkedIn profile, that goes a long way. I mean, every queer person will say probably that first time they saw a teacher or a neighbor or someone put up that pride flag, it makes a difference.
Yeah, those symbols and signifiers help to make us feel a little more safe in certain spaces. I want to shift gears to kind of close out this fireside chat with understanding a little bit about the motivation why StartOut wanted to dip their toe in Canada. What motivated you to activate a presence here?
So I think when Dallas was talking earlier, she explained it because it wasn't really start out as a volunteer-led organization. We were founded by 4 volunteers, 4 founders who were having trouble getting their foot in the door, and they decided to throw an event and see if other people are having the challenge. Lo and behold, they did. Over the last 15 years, we've grown. We have a professional staff. Danny works tremendously well with programming boards across 2 countries now who want to host events. But I think Danny would share this too. Most of that work is volunteer led. The volunteer groups in the cities step up and say, you know what, we want this in our city. See you in a second, Sam. We want this to happen, and we're here to help. And so it was less about a decision on our end and more a decision from founders in Canada like Dallas, who said, you know what, there's an opportunity here. We can do more. And StartOut's goal and our reason is to help support you do what you need to do and what you can do best. Because quite frankly, Vancouver is different than Toronto. Toronto is different than Chicago. Chicago is different than Miami. How can we take best practices from each of those places and enable and empower you to be the best entrepreneur you can be?
With your final minute here, Brian, I'm curious. I don't know how much time you've spent in Canada or talking with Canadian founders or entrepreneurs, but do you see any or do you notice any differences between the landscape in the US and here in Canada?
So I love visiting Canada. I go regularly. In fact, I'll be there with my son in Victoria in July, which will be a lot of fun. And in fact, I'm proud to say I've been to 9 provinces and 1 territory, so almost done. But specific to your question, no, our founders are the same. They're folks who want to create, who see a problem and want to solve that problem. And I think by virtue of being part of the queer community, also have this idea of purpose beyond just profit, which is really exciting. And I will say Dallas is a great example. Canadian founders have been part of StartOut through and through. In fact, last year at the demo day in Los Angeles, Ryder Damon won first place and took home the grand prize in cash and a Brooks Brothers suit. And he's based in Ontario. And in fact, our first place in San Francisco went to high school on the west coast of Canada as well too. And Dallas is not the only Growth Lab alum who's based in Canada either. So we've had a long history with Canada, and I'm excited to see what the future holds with this new programming board.
Well, I think I speak for all of us. We are as well. Thank you so much, Brian, for your time.
Thank you for having me, and have a great evening. Excited to hear what's next.
With that, you could not have queued me up better. I'm going to hand the mic over to my programming board member, colleague, Kelvin Kung, who is going to take over the discussion for a panel. Over to you, Kelvin.
Great. Thanks, Sam. And what a wonderful series of insights, Brian. So I think our next session here is we're very honored to have like a powerhouse series of speakers with us, Mandy, Vanessa, and Matthew. And if you folks can turn your camera on so I can introduce each of you before we start our little chat here. So I'm gonna give a quick brief overview for everyone's bios, and then we're gonna have a series of questions, and then we'll have some questions for the general panel. And then if we have time, we'll end off with a bit of Q&A from the audience. So I'm gonna start with Vanessa. Vanessa Intinu, pronouns she, her. Vanessa comes to us from a very multicultural background, Nigerian, Kenyan, Montrealer, like me, and as well as spending time in the Netherlands. Vanessa is joining us from the CGLCC. For those who don't know, it's Canada's 2SLGBTQI Chamber of Commerce. Her role is Membership Services Coordinator and Supplier Diversity. Her expertise lies in communications, membership engagement, and program/project managing. Vanessa's motivation for joining the CGLCC stems from her commitment to amplifying the voices and improving the experiences of historically marginalized communities. She identifies as a Black African woman with an unseen disability, and in her leisure time, Vanessa finds joy in traveling, spending time with her favorite kitty Mango, and spending quality time with her loved ones. Next, we have Matthew McLaughlin, pronouns he, him. He's the founder and CEO of the Bow platform and Bulldog Productions. The bow as in the end of the rainbow, I believe. Matthew is redefining how queer stories are told and consumed. Matthew is a trailblazer at the intersection of media, technology, and LGBTQ+ advocacy, with over 15 years of experience in media production and storytelling. Matthew is building a revolutionary streaming platform dedicated to queer content, free, accessible, and community-driven. Their work is rooted in the belief that storytelling is a powerful tool for education, connection, and empowerment. Through the Bow, Matthew is creating a digital home for queer voices and new models of inclusive media. And our last panelist here, Mandy Potter, pronouns she, her. Mandy is an award-winning entrepreneur, investor, and the co-founder and managing partner of Misfit Ventures, Canada's first and North America's largest LGBTQ+ venture capital fund. With over 15 years of experience scaling VC-backed startups, raising millions in funding, and leading companies to successful exits, Mandy is a fierce advocate for underrepresented founders. Their mission is to prove the investability of queer entrepreneurs and to reshape the venture landscape to be more inclusive, equitable, and visionary. Mandy's work is driven by a belief in the power of difference and the transformative potential of bold, unapologetic leadership. So our first round of questions here, and maybe we can start with you, Vanessa. Maybe you can share more on why the CGLCC is so important to the ecosystem and why corporations should procure from 2SLGBTQ+ owners.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Calvin. Can't believe I'm first. Oop, hope I do well. No, I think the CGLCC on so many fronts is so foundational and so important to queer entrepreneurs. I think earlier in the call, Nancy mentioned that she had attended our CGLCC summit last week. And I think for myself, being in my second year being at the CGLCC, I just saw the beauty of community, folks being able to kind of congregate together, 2SLGBTQI+ entrepreneurs being able to congregate in a space that was safe. Folks understood their experience. There was no need to put on any sort of, act or performance. It felt like everyone was on the same page. I think the CGLCC provides that community for folks to come together and meet like-minded individuals and individuals that share similar experiences. It was definitely very beautiful to witness that. Outside of community, I think the CGLCC also offers a lot of resources. Through our programming, we do have a lot of capacity building opportunities for 2SLGBTQI owned plus businesses. I think at least a lot of the businesses within our supplier database are solopreneurs or folks that are just getting into business who may not have the vast, understanding of how business works. They may understand their businesses themselves, but maybe not other facets. And I think we try to offer that sort of information and those resources readily to queer entrepreneurs. Additionally, we do try to, facilitate that connection between queer entrepreneurs and corporate partners in a space where maybe that sort of connection isn't as easy or isn't as seamless. So I think in many ways, we, outside of contracts and, trying to get those deals, I think what I find the most beautiful outside of all those factors is really the community that is built around being a member or being part of the CGLCC, just seeing people hug. I've never been to a summit like the one I was at last week. I often feel not only as myself working in this organization, I always feel like I'm constantly with friends. So I think there is that bringing together that I do think the CGLCC offers.
Beautiful star. You did super well, in my opinion.
Yeah, but
and on the topic of LGBT+ ownership, so Matthew, this might be a good question for you. Maybe you can share more on your experience being an LGBTQ+ CEO and how having a queer network, keeping doors open, allows for other LGBTQ+ people into this space.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. in terms of your question, I think when it comes to queer media, it's difficult because for a lot of spaces, particularly the people at the very top who are saying yes or no are not necessarily queer, and that's really what we're trying to change at the Bow is making sure that we're kind of in charge of our own distribution. And the other aspect is that most entertainment in the queer space, when it comes to queer stories, has been not really as diverse as our community itself. It's been mostly, and I'm saying this as a white cis male, it's been mostly white cis males, mostly through that perspective. But the queer community transcends race, religion, socioeconomic status. In my opinion, I think that queer people are here to show the world that we need to work together and that like actually it's our diversity and the bridge of our humanity as queer folks that hopefully will actually be able to make people see past their differences. So that's the part that I'm really excited about. And um, in terms of the media landscape, I also think that where we're currently sitting with a lot of brands and corporations leaving sponsorship, we're taking note. We're seeing it, and for the ones that are sticking around and standing by our side, we'll also take note. But it's also time for us to kind of maybe invest in our own. Find the companies within the queer space that are doing excellent things and be able to support those spaces because it's an ecosystem. It feeds itself. So it's important that we also build those other companies up as well, because in essence, they will come back to us and hopefully be able to support us in our storytelling kind of mission.
Right. Um, yeah, it's been disheartening to hear that, some of the funding has been pulled. So I think keeping on and focusing on the mission is definitely something we can all relate to. And for Mandy, maybe kind of related to the kind of business side of it and being a co-founder, what inspired you to co-found Misfit Ventures, and how does it center queer founders in the Canadian ecosystem?
Hi everyone, by the way, it's so nice to be here. There is quite a few sort of things that came together, I feel like all at the right time, which eventually created, Misfit Ventures, but StartOut Canada, or StartOut, I should say, was actually a big part of this, and I'll get to how that came to be. So for those of you who don't know, my background is being a tech founder. So I've actually gone through the fundraising process myself, and so I have very much a lived experience. So when I was a very young, queer, androgynous, extremely tattooed woman in Silicon Valley many, many years ago, trying to raise money for my company back then. And I experienced the bias firsthand. So I would walk into those doors, and this is kind of like when, just before we really started talking about diversity, maybe at the beginning of talking about it a little bit, but there's very few funds back then that actually focused on diversity. And the ones that did, we actually have, or had on our cap table back then. But walking through a lot of those rooms, I'd see the bias firsthand, where I started my first company with my brother, and he is, a white cis straight male. All of the questions, all of the attention would be directed towards him. None of that would be directed towards me. And so I think that I knew at a very early stage in my career, which is a little different than most people's path to VC, that I wanted to get into the venture capital world. I was probably 19 or 20, right around the time when I, was fundraising and starting my own company, that I was like, one day I want to be a VC, which I don't think is very typical. And so I think that, I went through my career of starting companies. I've sold companies. I've bought competitors before. I've bootstrapped companies. I've also seen failures. So I've seen a lot of what it takes to be a founder. And I think that I was at this point in my career, and this is where StartOut actually comes in, is that there is a lot of data that came out in one of those reports where it showed, I think it was over, a 20-year period, 120,000 founders, where it showed that queer founders created 36% more jobs, 44% more exits, and 114% more patents. And so we actually used that as leverage to be like, holy shit, like this is the time that we should be really be addressing this gap. And when we started Misfits, we'd already seen a whole bunch of different funds coming into play that were addressing some other gaps, like the first Black fund, the first Indigenous fund, multiple women's funds, but there was one missing, and that was for queer founders. And we all know we only get 0.5% of funding, but this is not a small market. Like 30% of Gen Z identify under the queer umbrella, and 85% of them are expected to start at least one business in their lifetime. So this is an extremely entrepreneurial cohort of existing and upcoming entrepreneurs. And so I think it was a lot of these different, I'm sort of a data person if you can't tell. But I think that it was a lot of these different stats, and then also my personal background, what I had experienced myself that, led us to starting Misfit Ventures at this time.
It's a very complete answer. I'm also a data person, so that was very grounding. It's always very helpful to hear, kind of scientific metrics to kind of cut through the kind of noise and be able to understand what our community offers. So that was, I think, very insightful for everyone to kind of take back and learn more from. So thank you for that. So our second round of questions is going to be more about like kind of the business kind of aspects of our community. So maybe I can go back to Vanessa there. In terms of expanding our understanding of what businesses look like, maybe you can talk more about like how what are the unique suppliers, the kind of inclusive consulting, the kind of new innovative businesses you're seeing from the LGBTQ plus community?
No, absolutely. Thanks, Kelvin. And like I said, I think within our database, we have about, I think we're standing at 270 certified suppliers that are certified with us at the CGLCC. And in my year and a little bit here, I've seen such vast different unique sort of businesses pop up. We do have like a share of different like product-based suppliers and service-based providers. But I've seen, and within that, in and amongst that, I've seen a lot of unique ones, from, you have your very, I don't want to say typical, the word typical sounds negative, but you have your standard sort of like consulting firm or your HR firm or your IT team, et cetera. But then you're seeing folks who are coming in doing something very like completely different. We have a somatic masseuse within our database. Similarly, we have a weight inclusive consultant, which I believe Canada and not the US has actually the US and not Canada for once. The US actually has laws that protect bigger people, or the term that the consultant insists on using is fat people, whereas Canada doesn't. So this consultant is trying to consult businesses and ensure that they are, diversity does also include folks who have bigger bodies. So seeing that those two sort of businesses come up, and like I said, the masseuse, you can tell that folks are starting to, again, think outside of the box or do things that are outside of that conventional sort of business model. And I think that's only going to continue to grow in time. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Yes, it does. And I think the kind of point you raised about the larger silhouette of folks, like that's something maybe that's competitive for the Canadian landscape. Ontario, we lead a lot of the discussion for how to accommodate for people, and it's inscribed in law. The Accessibility of Ontario's Disability Act actually prescribes physical metrics for how larger people or like kind of different accessibility requirements are accommodated for by law. So that's something that's uniquely Canadian. So that's a wonderful answer. And Matthew, what are some of the most innovative business models that you've seen from queer-led startups?
I feel like I'm kind of new-ish to the startups space in terms of other queer entrepreneurs. So I don't know if I'm necessarily the best person to ask this question of, but yeah, I'm currently in the capital raising. We built our own application from scratch, and we're currently in the process of patenting different parts of it. I'm someone who loves creative collaboration, and I don't really care if it's my idea, if it's a great idea, like I love that. And so yeah, I come more from the production world, so working more on sets, working directly with clients on their brand. That's really the world that I come from more than anything, is uh, helping companies, organizations tell their stories from a visual capacity, on camera. And for me, for a long time, the production world was always a place where I didn't really come out. I also, for a long time, because I don't know if it's just the my mannerisms or when people see me on set, but typically my queerness isn't something that people necessarily assume until we're maybe a little bit more close, and I'll throw out a, okay, girl, like, give me a break. And then they're like, oh, there she is, there she is. And then we all of a sudden there's like a bond or a look, and you're like, I see you, I see you. And then there flipped a switch about halfway through my career when I was like, I'm just not going to have to put myself in a situation where I feel like I have to come out. I'm just going to put it all out on the table when people come into a Bulldog production set. And because of that, 80% of our team is queer identifying. And of course, we're so happy to have allies. Couldn't do it without them. And so yeah, I would say from the queer entrepreneur, I have a lot of friends that are in the landscape of being entrepreneurs as queer folks, but it's so diverse. Everything from makers of products that you would buy on Etsy to uh, writing writing ad copy for big pharmaceutical brands and making sure that it's like Canada approved to hit all of those guidelines. So but I'm very much more in the production side.
Right. And I mean, I think maybe the mini follow-up question to that is that you kind of in a way founded two companies too, right? Do you want to like also kind of talk about how you've come to that conclusion and how the different companies
Yeah.
kind
Yeah, so when I started Bulldog Productions, it was actually out of the housing crisis. I was working at another production company, and I had gone from being kind of the office manager, Devil Wears Prada, Anne Hathaway role, where I was reporting to basically five other producers. And then I was also making sure that our bills were paid and the invoices were brought in on the right time, and that we had coffee, and that like when there was meetings that things were printed, or when we would go out for pitches that we would have everything kind of ready to go. And then because I come from script writing and analysis, that's what my education is in. Actually, the founder of Buddies in Bad Times Theater, which is literally right beside me, Sky Gilbert, he was my professor at University of Guelph. So they brought me into writing pitch decks for TV shows. And then I slowly, over the course of 3 years, then became head of development. We sold three different shows that I had worked on, and then I pitched my own idea to them, and they were like, okay, you have to go direct it. And then I did, and I felt like it was going to be the big break. And then Ken West went bankrupt. Uh, we went from basically having um, four different productions going on simultaneously and 15 people in house to one production and three people in house. And we all basically had to leave, and there was no work in production. So for a year, I was like, what do I do? And all of these people who had kind of sat with me in pitch meetings and put their heart and soul into these concepts were now looking to me to be like, hey, what's happening with this? Is it just nothing's going to happen? Like, is it over? And then I started my own company, and then I was kind of an accidental entrepreneur. And then fast forward to, right before the pandemic, we had just gotten our first scripted series on Amazon Prime and Out TV. And I had done a bunch of commercials. I'd worked in the nonprofit side of things with EGAL Canada, with the Movember Foundation, with Rainbow Railroad. And for the first time during the pandemic, I couldn't go on set. We weren't allowed to be in a group setting. So for the first time, I had a chance to think of, with my team, what do we want to do? How can we? So we spent our time doing development, figuring out what type of stories we wanted to tell. Uh, and then when we sent out a bunch of pitch decks and they weren't going anywhere, I realized, wow, we're never going to really be able to tell our own stories because the people at the top are not queer and they're not going to get it. And it was like a whisper for the bow for a long time. And then I said it out loud and I'm like, okay, I have to do it. We have to do it. And I've just been, it's really a love project because so many of the queer community and allies have just shown up and made it happen. And we're finally in this place where we're going to be raising capital, and we've had 3 successful meetings with TD Bank as one of our lead sponsors. We're going to hopefully try and secure that one before we move on to our next ones. But it's a crazy journey, and I'm just going for the ride, and I keep showing up and hoping for the best.
Yeah, well, it's very inspiring what you're doing, so we're all rooting for you. And then we're going to ask Mandy as well the question about you've kind of touched about this earlier already, but what are some of the common misconceptions investors have about the 2S LGBTQ+ led startups, and especially in the Canadian context?
Yeah, I think I did touch on this a bit earlier, is that there's not enough queer founders to have a fund dedicated to this, which is what part of the stats I was saying earlier about 30% of Gen Z identifying under the queer umbrella. And it goes to show, like, it's interesting because we get to prove this out right now. So we already have thousands of founders in our pipeline already, and we haven't done any type of PR or push or anything for founders. This is just, learning about us through the ecosystem, VCs, other VCs, accelerators, different partners, organizations, sending founders our way. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions, is that this is just not a big enough market to be servicing in the way that we're doing, which is absolutely, untrue. And I think that a lot of investors also overlook the resilience and creativity of queer founders and what they bring from navigating these systemic barriers. So we see a lot of underrepresented founders go into impact ventures like clean tech or health tech. Dallas is a great example of that. Data shows that if you invest in queer founders, you're going to get that return on investment, but you're also getting that return on impact too. And so, I think there's quite a few misconceptions. That's more than one, but those are some of the ones that frustrate me the most, and that I'm really, actively pushing to show is not true.
And maybe also like a mini follow-up question to that as well. Like, in those contexts where you kind of see there is kind of bias in real time, or are there ways for us to kind of quickly counteract that in real time, or would there be other solutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is, and this is the reason why I said that, StartOut was a big push towards us starting this fund, is because there's such limited data on the queer community. A lot of times, we need more inclusive reporting. So many studies, include a racial or gender lens, but we're often overlooking the queer community as a whole. And so the more that we're able to actually get data, like StartOut has come out with, the more that we're able to prove this, and the more that we're able to debunk these false narratives.
Perfect. So data is still like a really important piece to it. Third round of questions is watching time here as well, but kind of getting more into the nitty-gritty of the business side of it. But at Vanessa, at StartOut Canada, we're talking a lot we're talking a lot about how to reach people who are not in big cities like in Toronto. So maybe you can share more about how does the CGLCC bridge these physical boundaries? Like how does CGLCC provide actual solutions for entrepreneurs and those who are wanting to become one from rural cities and whatnot?
No, absolutely. I think in the last few years, or at least since I've been here, there has been that intentionality within the CGLC. I'm not on mute. Okay, perfect. Within the CGLCC to know, support folks that are outside of, let's say, the hot cities, Vancouver, Toronto, etc. Because folks do feel alienated and maybe don't feel as inspired to continue their business. They don't, like, again, with that intersecting identity of being a queer entrepreneur, you might feel not only isolated as an entrepreneur, but specifically as a queer entrepreneur. With that, we've tried to, with our in-person events, our in-person events, for example, we do try to shift cities. We do have an event coming up in November that we're not going to do in Toronto, but in the GTA, just for folks that might not feel as readily included in an event that's simply in Toronto. Outside of that, we've tried to gear a lot of our portals and platforms that our different suppliers use into a more interactive space. So recently we've recently erected this interactive CGLCC community platform, which kind of functions like a Facebook, LinkedIn meets Reddit sort of thing, where folks are able to DM one another. There's a live feed where we're often encouraging folks that I onboard to be like, just pop a message in there. If you're based in a city that's, not in one of the hot cities, for example, feel free to write, hey, anybody in XYZ city want to grab a drink, or I have this event in XYZ city. There are a lot of, events that I do promote on the behalf of suppliers who are not in necessarily these main cities, because we do understand that can be quite isolating. So yeah, those are some of the tools that we've tried to introduce to ensure that folks feel included and not so isolated.
Yeah, and I think with the kind of getting resources and preparing for these kind of conversations. And Matthew, I think you also touched upon this just a little bit in your previous answer, but how can we better prepare queer founders for investor conversations?
Me or Matthew?
Matthew.
Matthew, okay.
Right.
I think sometimes it's just a matter of actual practice and also knowing your audience. One of the biggest things that I really struggle with, I'll just be honest, I really struggle with, I'm a details person, so I love giving you all of it and look at this and look at that. But a lot of times when it comes to these types of investor presentations or pitches, it's really about, you have to look at everything through an editing eye. Who am I talking to, and what motivates them? What problems are you solving for them? Or are they the perfect audience that is all about making change happen and are motivated by the heartstrings? Unfortunately, most are not. Most are there for figuring out, okay, how can I make money or get my message out there to the right audience as quickly and as efficient as possible. So when it comes to entrepreneurs and pitching and trying to raise capital, I think the biggest thing is starting and knowing that it's not going to be perfect, and being okay with not being perfect, because perfect is boring. You just got to start. And when you are unsure if what you're doing is right, reach out to your queer community, because a win for you is a win for all of us, and we want to see other queer entrepreneurs succeed. I love seeing other people's entrepreneur success stories, especially in the queer community, because it is hard. It's really, 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 really effing hard sometimes to just be fully out and fully authentic, but living in your truth and being authentic has so much power. And when you do it, you also kind of allow others who are afraid, you also are giving them power.
That is very beautiful. And I think we're watching on time here, but final question to Mandy, just kind of $1 million question here is, how do you evaluate potential in founders who may not fit the traditional mold in the Canadian context?
So I don't think that I'd be looking at different criteria, whether, let's say I was investing in queer founder or like Zuckerberg type founders. But I do think that because of who I get to invest in, I have a competitive advantage. Because when we get a clear insight into founders' lives, that's when trust is built, and trust is number one when investing in a founder. So kind of like what we were talking about earlier is that if you don't know everything about your founder, if you're not, disclosing that you are queer, you're actually you don't fully know that founder. You don't fully probably know their family, their lives, their day to day, that sort of thing. And so I do think that there is, a big competitive advantage to building relationships between queer VCs and queer founders. And when I say trust is number one, it's because when you're investing in a founder, I need to know if something's going wrong so that I can help. So most founders hide it until it's too late. I've seen this millions of times in my career, is that they get nervous to tell their investors things are going south, they're running out of money, blah, blah, blah. So they're trying to get creative to figure out ways to try to solve their problems when really they should be going to their investors, disclosing this, and their investors are probably likely going to want to help them, right? And so I think that trust being really important. I'm also investing, I wouldn't say solely in a founder, but mostly in a founder versus the product at the stage that we're investing in. So we invest in pre-seed, seed. 40 to 50% of companies at this stage are going to pivot. So I'm not really investing in the product. I'm investing in the founder and knowing that the right ones that are going to be resilient, push through, find the right ways to pivot, not give up after they take capital, that sort of thing.
Well, that's really good insight from everyone, really amazing insight. And unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I'm going to turn it back over to Sam for our ending closeouts.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kelvin. Thank you to all of our speakers, Brian, Danny, for your help, your technical help, Dallas, Nancy, Kelvin, and all of our panelists as well. Lots of takeaways, even for someone who's not in this space intimately. It's fascinating. As you'll see on your screen, there's a QR code. If you haven't already, do take a moment to complete that survey for us. It's our first event, so be gentle. But the feedback is super helpful to us as we continue to plan events and programming and supports for entrepreneurs, founders, and the like across Canada. On behalf of the entire StartOut Canada Programming Board, thank you all for attending, and we will see you at the next event. Take care.